I joined Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry, and in my third year, I received a prophetic word from Sean Bowles saying that God was giving me to my ex-husband who ended up being abusive. Here's where we left off. I am living in Atlanta with Ted, and I am working for this celebrity couple because they are in town filming for a movie. And this is just a very fun time of my life. I'm spending a lot of time away from Ted, and I'm feeling a lot less isolated because I'm kind of building this community of people that I met during my background actor time, and then I'm also just having a lot of fun with this family. So things are looking up, but the Wake Up Olive movement had just happened, and he had told me that my lack of faith was the reason that Olive was not going to be raised from the dead. So we were having a lot of tension during this time. I always say that 2019 was the best and worst year of my life. In my personal life, things are going well with this family. On top of that, I have started running a lot. So I signed up for my first half marathon, which was a huge accomplishment because I still had fibromyalgia, but I had been learning to run through the pain, and it was just a very big personal accomplishment for me that I was training for this half marathon. Now, on the other side, I am having a horrible time with Ted because the abuse continued to ramp up. So if you remember, he had strangled me and I decided to stay. And I told him that if he ever physically abused me again, that I would leave. Now, that ended up not being true because, which is very common, but it's because the times that he would be physical with me after that, it was always less than what he had done before. And for some reason in my mind, I felt like, well, if you didn't leave when he strangled you, how can you leave when he sprains your finger or when your keys cut you because he won't let you leave the house? And just these lesser forms of domestic violence in my mind, lesser forms, it just didn't feel like I could leave. So some of the other things that he would do would be to lock me out of the house in the winter. He would run inside, lock me out, and I would have no keys, and I would just walk around the complex until he allowed to let me back in. Sometimes he would stand behind my car so that I couldn't leave. And yeah, it was just a lot of this sort of behavior was ramping up and becoming like a very, very frequent pattern in our marriage. So while things are going really well, I am very much struggling to just stay afloat in my relationship with Ted. And trigger warning for suicidal ideation. At this time, I was extremely suicidal. I was constantly thinking about unaliving myself despite all of these good things going on in my life, because when I was home, I felt like I had no way out. And the idea of getting divorced was just so incredibly daunting to me. And if you grew up in evangelical circles, you know, like they raised you to believe that divorce is the worst possible thing in the world. And as Christians, it is our job to believe in the sanctity of marriage and not give up on marriage. So I could just not see myself getting divorced. And then on top of that, I have this prophetic word, and I feel like this was God's will. And in my mind, if I threw out my marriage, I would have to throw out my belief system, because the cult is what made me marry him in the first place. So if I admit that this marriage is not good and I walk away from it, it felt like I also had to walk away from God. So it was a lot to decide at one time. I ended up making a deal with myself that if I ever felt like I was going to unalive myself, that I would get divorced, and that if it came between those two options, that I promised myself that I would get out. And my mental health was very much declining during this time. He was calling me a whore. He was calling me Jezebel, which is like a very mean thing that you can say about a woman in these Christian circles. So there was a time where I'm like on the floor crying, and he is just screaming at me, telling me that I'm a whore. And I remember he also said, you know, if we ever got divorced, you would just be a whore and you would sleep around. And I was on the floor and I just started pulling out my hair because I felt so unlovable. And this was a different time too, but there was another time where I like scratched my face because I just felt so ugly. I felt like a hideous person, and I was self-imploding, you know. And he would get on the floor and tell me, like, hold my hands and say, like, I'm going to commit you to a mental facility, you know. So I feel like I'm crazy. I'm absolutely going crazy. I don't know what's wrong with me. but it is just this compounding of this very abusive environment that I lived in. So the marriage lasted for 4 years, and yeah, I was just reaching my breaking point by the end of the marriage. Also during this time, this was around the time that Chris Watts unalived his wife and children. And when I saw that in the news, I just remembered thinking, this could be me. Like, I genuinely believed that Ted could unalive me. And it was very, very scary. So I would go to bed at night, be laying there, and just be Googling like warning signs. Is it okay to leave? How dangerous is it if da 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 da? And there was even one time, like, this was so deep in my memory, I had forgotten about it, but there was one time we were laying in bed and we weren't fighting, nothing was happening, and I'm like half asleep, and all of a sudden I heard him say, I want to choke you out, which, like, murder me, unalive me, right? So, you know, he was just scary, very, very scary. So at this time, I'm thinking that, like, what if he were to unalive me and throw me in the woods behind our apartment? And I'm just like living in this very dark place. So I know that this might be like very triggering to listen to. I wanted to share some positive things that happened later on, because I do have a couple pictures, and it was an extremely healing thing that happened to me in 2020. This was our apartment in Atlanta, and our apartment was here on the left, and then there was the woods behind our apartment. And like I said, I was scared of him, and that in my mind I was like running through scenarios of things that could happen. So like these woods actually really scared me, just because he scared me so much. But I had the chance to go back in 2020. In 2020 I got to go back, and I just wanted to revisit the apartment knowing that I had left. I think this was about a year after I left, and it was an incredibly healing time to be back and see where I came out of, and the fact that I made it out alive. And spoiler alert, but I met the love of my life. He's absolutely wonderful. I cry every time I talk about Brandon. This is my now husband. He is everything, and we got to go back to this apartment, and I just wanted to show him a little bit of my life in Atlanta. And it was so healing to go back with somebody that I love and who loves me and respects me and who I feel safe with. So this was just a very cool, redemptive moment for me. Next, I'm going to talk about the incident that finally made me leave, and how I got a job offer from this nanny couple, and it was a very cool time, but then it all came crumbling down very, very quickly. So follow for the next part.